Doomstown is basically, it's a burial ground. It's a close word to tombstone. This is a burial ground, and if you don't come here and join the gang, if you don't with what they're with, you're doomed. That means you're dead, man. So it's either you're with it or you're against it.
Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to talk about the notorious Toronto gangster Twinky and his criminal life, and also how he is the alleged leader of the biggest street gang in Rexdale and one of the biggest in all of Toronto, the Jamestown Crew located in Rexdale. I'll also talk about the gang itself. His name is Oliver Augustus Willis, but most people just call him Twinky. He had a very large presence in the streets and made a huge amount of money off of it. Many people in the surrounding area of where his gangs operated were afraid of him, to the point where witnesses even refused to tell their statements out of fear of their lives being endangered. And his earnings from his gang-related activities were huge, considering that he even got seized out of a $200,000 watch. But before we get into his story, I'll get a quick backstory of the gang and where it's located out of the way. The Jamestown Crew, aka the Jamestown Crips or Doomstown Crips, are based in the Jamestown Crescent area of Rexdale, also referred to as Doomstown. They were once regarded by the police to be one of the most active and sophisticated street gangs in Toronto's northwest end, and are even known by police to have ties with other gangs from the US, along with ties all over the world. It was created in the late 1980s by the children of the huge number of West Indian immigrants that moved to Canada in the 1960s and 70s. Rexdale used to be an area thriving off of factory work for all of the new immigrants, but as the world began to shift to specialized jobs which required higher qualifications, people were losing jobs or just unable to get them in the first place. At the same time, the rise of crack cocaine in the streets was taking place. These factors made turning to crime and hustling on the streets look like a very appealing option for many people with struggling families who were unable to pay their bills. This led to the new generations of youth selling drugs, creating alliances, and claiming territory in the streets, naturally leading to gang violence over turf and drug wars as well. And of course, the creation of the Jamestown Crew in the 80s, and them identifying themselves as Crips in the 90s, Jamestown Crips. As I said before, the Jamestown Crew was seen by police to be one of the biggest and most violent gangs in Rexdale, with the amount of members and associates being in the hundreds. It was also the first gang in Rexdale to identify as Crip, essentially starting the whole Crip movement there. Fast forward to today, and most of the gangs in Rexdale identify as Crip. They've had beef and been involved in long and bloody wars with the Ardwick Bloods and the Mount Olive Crips for over a decade, among many other gangs as well, both in and outside of Rexdale. They also have beef with other notable names in the underground Toronto rap scene as well, such as the Uptop Driftwood Crips from Jane and Finch, home to many well-known rappers such as Pressa, YG, Brenna Vance, Tall Up Twins, Houdini, and more. However, both groups have actually tried to align in the past, but ultimately were never able to. They are clicked up with other Rexdale Crip gangs, such as the Stovetop Rexdale Crips, the Tanridge Rexdale Crips, and the O-Block Rexdale Crips. Now let's get into Twinky. He had 2 teardrop tattoos on his face, and the World Is Mine tattoo from Scarface on his upper right arm. And as I said before, he was a very powerful guy in the streets, with having the firepower of one of, if not the biggest gang in all of Rexdale. And he was also making shit tons of money, and even being caught with over 70 kilograms of cocaine. I'll talk about that later on in the video. He and his gang were making money from selling drugs in the streets, as well as distributing firearms to other gangs. He was known by police as being a very intelligent and tough figure who showed very little fear. His first public encounter with the law was in the July of 2003, and at that time Twinky was seen as an alleged member of the Jamestown Crips and not a leader. We'll get more into how the cops figured out that he was actually one of the top dogs later on in the video. Twinky was charged with the murder of a 19-year-old man named Amar Joseph Young, who was shot and killed at a street party on Eglinton Avenue after the Junior Caravana Carnival. Amar was gunned down by a man in a car while he was standing on the sidewalk in between his 2 brothers, Richard and Kingsley. Originally, Kingsley had told police that Twinky was the shooter and that he had seen him in the car when he shot his brother. But when the preliminary hearing for his case came up, he retracted his statement and told the Ontario court judge that he was lying. Pretty suspicious behavior if you ask me. And shortly after, his older brother, who was also with him when he died, told the judge that he would not testify in the case because he feared for his life. This ties what other people in the area said about him and the gang as well. News reporters had gone to the Jamestown Crescent area located in Rexdale in 2003 to ask locals about the presence of gangs in their neighborhoods and also the impact that they had on their living conditions. They were interviewing many people, even little girls as young as the age of 10, who all followed a similar theme of not wanting what they say to be in the paper and to remain anonymous, because they were afraid that something will happen to them if they get seen snitching. One woman who demanded to remain anonymous warned the news reporter that quote-unquote, "you don't want to see what's going on here." Another woman who demanded to remain anonymous as well had said, "If you're a rat, things can happen to you." There's clearly large amounts of fear in the neighborhoods that the Jamestown Crips operate in. However, Joseph was an alleged member of the Mount Olive's Crips gang, which Twinky's gang has beef with, so his brothers retracting their statements and refusing to give one in the first place might just be due to them not being snitches if they are part of the gang themselves. But I seriously doubt it, because if that was the case, they probably wouldn't have originally given the statement and also wouldn't tell the judge that they fear for their lives. His next encounter with the law happened in 2006, when Toronto's murder rate was at an all-time high and police wanted to crack down on the groups that were involved in this violence. Their main target was the Jamestown Crips, as after some investigation, they deemed them to be a worthy target of a massive raid, since they were the first Crip gang in Rexdale and seemed to be at the center of the beefs between gangs that were going on in the streets, since they were one of the biggest and most dangerous gangs in the area. This caused the birth of Project XXX, at the time the largest anti-gang roundup the GTA had ever seen. These raids involved over 600 police officers and ended up arresting over 100 people, mainly men in their mid-20s. There was also 20 gun seized, including an AK-47, also 15 kilograms of cocaine and other drugs as well, along with some cash. The people arrested were charged with various things, ranging from trafficking guns and narcotics to things like attempted murder. However, the most major things the police had gotten out of this was shutting down what they called a pipeline of firearms, flowing into Canada from the south side of the US. They weren't just supplying the Jamestown Crips with guns either, they were also supplying groups outside of Toronto as well. The police didn't give any exact information of who was behind the gun pipeline, but had mentioned that they were coming from Florida. Now let's get into Twinky's part in these raids. As I said before, the Jamestown Crips were the main target for the police for Project XXX. So during the project, the police were wiretapping many alleged members of the gang to investigate further and try to get insight of what was really going on in the streets. Since Twinky was an alleged member of the gang and had a run-in with the law a couple of years back, he was one of the people being monitored. While intercepting his calls, they caught Twinky bragging about his reputation, saying things like, quote-unquote, "I am the heart of the town, and when KT is down for you, your name is good in the hood." This is when police started to allege him to be the leader of the Jamestown Crips, as he clearly had a high status in his block. He was also caught with 2 loaded handguns, which he ended up getting sentenced to 3 years in prison for, since he had pled guilty to possession of a restricted firearm and possession of a prohibited firearm. His next encounter was likely the turning point for him to start guessing his life choices, and was the largest crime he had ever been a part of. The police had finally got him with a large bust. Twinky was basically in a scene from a movie. Soon after he got released out of prison for his 3-year sentence, he was overseas in the capital of the Dominican Republic, staying in a 5-star hotel. He had a jacuzzi in his room and foreign whips parked outside. This is when the Dominican Republic's National Drug Control Agency, the DNCD, arrested Twinky along with 2 other people from Toronto. They seized 72 kilograms of cocaine that they found in the back of their pickup truck that was reportedly going to be brought to Toronto. There was also $49,000 in cash, money counters, 32 cell phones, a pistol with ammunition, and also a watch that is valued at $200,000. He went from chilling in a 5-star beach resort to being behind bars in the Santo Domingo jail, in the heart of the Dominican Republic. Apparently, the Toronto police were intercepting his phone calls once again back in Toronto as a part of another major project against multiple gangs in Rexdale, including gangs that were allegedly buying weapons from Twinky. Over the intercepted phone calls, the police heard Twinky saying stuff like his Italian associates flew him out for a bit and that he was there on a business trip. Another call had him talking about picking up his passport, while another had him calling a woman back in Toronto to tell her how nice his room was. Twinky and his co-accused were all originally sentenced to 10 years in jail and each fined $200,000. However, after 2 years in a Caribbean jail, Twinky was acquitted for a lack of proof and in April 2012 deported back to Canada. Since returning home, Twinky remained in custody on weapons charges. Later the next year on August 6th, instead of a trial, Twinky apparently had a change of heart and pleaded guilty to possessing a firearm, offering to traffic a firearm, a breach of weapons prohibition order, and trafficking cocaine. At his sentencing hearing, his lawyer said that Twinky is a changed man, and Twinky himself, while standing in the prisoner box, said that he acknowledged that he had broken the law and quote-unquote jeopardized society. He also said that when he gets released on parole, he vows to quote-unquote go on the right path. This is a very unusual yet interesting and positive thing for a person of his status to do. Twinky at the time was 31 years old and was a father of 2. Seeing how he's consistently hurting innocents around him, also being locked up for years at a time, and always having to worry about not being killed, likely had to do with him wanting a brighter future for himself. But at the same time, he could have just been saying all this to seem like a good person and get some sympathy from the judge and potentially get a reduced sentence. After his confessions, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with time given for his pre-sentence custody. In the same year he completed his 5-year sentence and came out a free man. His father, Oliver Willis Sr, had died on February 3, 2018, at the age of 73 from natural causes. His funeral took place just over 2 weeks later on February 17th, during the family day long weekend. Apparently his dad was charged at 64 years old for his alleged involvement in a murder that resulted from a man being stabbed. After looking for quite some time, I never found anything that followed up on the situation, regarding if he was found guilty and how many years he may have served if he did get convicted. But I just thought I'd throw that in there since I found it interesting. Let's get back into Twinky. Twinky had reportedly gone to pay his respects at his father's funeral and was also killed in a drive-by shooting 2 days later in Brampton, on Family Day on the same long weekend as his father's funeral at only 37 years old. His killer still hasn't been found by police and it's been over 2 years. After his death, there were many people saying great things about him and holding him at a high reputation. It's clear that he was well respected and loved by his block. I find his story really interesting because of how he was a major player in the streets and was very successful at what he did, but ended up being seemingly remorseful of his actions and even stating that he was a changed man. Unfortunately, years later, his life choices would catch up to him, because as we all know, the result of this lifestyle he lived usually results in one of 2 different endings: death or prison. This video was requested by many people, so if you have any suggestions of what to post in the future, let me know in the comments, because if I can find enough on a topic and find it interesting, there's a good chance I'll eventually do it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching and have a good one.